Coming up next on Public Access TV is Fan to Fan, the book game. Today's guest is local author Carol Lynn Luck to tell us about her 3 books and what it took to get them into print. Stay tuned. You will enjoy this episode on books, and you might get lucky. Welcome to Fan, the book game. I'm your host, Dave Hornfischer. I'm pleased today to welcome back a fellow previous AFTV board member, a former show co-host of the AFTV show Novel Ideas, and author Carol Lynn Luck, who happens to also have a PhD in cell biology, biochemistry, among other life experiences, to talk about her own 3 books today. Carol, welcome back. That's quite a background. You were last on Fan to Fan as a senior center chair volleyball star, too. You're indeed a Renaissance woman. Carol, it's great to see you again.
Hi, Dave. Thank you so much.
So why don't you begin? That's quite a background. Why don't we, before we get to the books, why don't we just talk a little about how you navigated all of these various parts of your life that led you to put together these 3 interesting pieces of literature?
I've always just pursued things that I thought were interesting and exciting. And as a little kid, I loved math and science. Natural curiosity, call it, or something like that. And so I was kind of an outcast. Back in those days, girls weren't supposed to be good in science. I mean, that was a no-no. But who cared? I didn't. And I ended up going to a summer institute in Indiana because nothing in Virginia, where I grew up, had dormitories for girls that had science programs. Virginia Tech didn't admit girls. Wow. So I ended up going to Purdue University and found my people and was very, very happy. Worked in a lab as an undergrad, got a paper published, was totally hooked on science. Ended up going to Cornell for my master's. And when I got there, I just felt closed in being in the lab all the time, and I wanted to be around people more. So I switched to science education, got my master's in that, taught there for a year, really enjoyed it, but kind of needed to jump into something new. So I landed, of all things, in Mississippi because they had a desperate teacher shortage, especially for math and science.
And this was in what year?
1970.
Okay.
And I decided, why not? Take a risk, take a jump, go do something. Well, I got there. Only to find out that I hadn't been keeping up with current events, and Mississippi had just integrated the schools that year. I was hired by the Meridian Separate School District. And so it was sort of a baptism by fire. On top of that, I couldn't pay my rent on this teacher salary. I mean, you think they're bad today. Anyway, I moonlighted in a hospital lab because I had that kind of background and experience, and ended up in Mississippi for a couple of years. And then a doctor one day made some comment about, I've got this cancer patient with 3 little children and there's nothing I can do. And sort of the motivation hit to go back to graduate school, got my doctorate, and worked in cancer research for a total of 10 years. And I enjoyed it while I was doing it, but again, I started feeling closed in by these walls. And people assume that lab folks don't need windows. They're perfectly content.
But this didn't lead to books.
Hidden in the basement. Oh, well, not yet.
Let's move to that.
Well, I never thought I would write a book. English class was always my worst. As a kid in high school, we had to, first essay was always, tell what you did over summer vacation. All my friends went to Europe and, you know, were zooming down the Audubon and doing exciting things. And we lived on a small farm, and I was shelling peas and lima beans in the basement all afternoon. You don't quite write about that. So I never had anything to say. And I always got B's in English classes and hated it. If anybody told me then, I would have said, forget it. So fast forward some years, and I ended up meeting my husband on an airplane and moving to Massachusetts. And
you decided to write books a little later in life.
Well, some people know that they're going to be an author when they're 6 years old, and others of us are sort of like Grandma Moses, that we like to tell stories but never thought of writing. Until I was still working, and my neighbor across the street had lost her husband. And so I would stop and check on her after work and just make sure she was doing okay. And one day, she's holding this envelope, and she says, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. My dear, dear friend in England says I have to write my story before I die. But what do I know from writing? I can knit anything." And I said, "Well," I said, "I can bring over my laptop, and if you tell it to me, I can put it down for you." So we had many wonderful sessions over a few months where I would stop by with my laptop, and she would tell me this incredible story of surviving from Poland to Siberia to India and back to England. And when we finished the story, she was absolutely thrilled. And she said, "Nobody's ever listened to my whole story. Nobody wants to hear about this." And I said, "But people should." And so then she said, "Well, does this mean we're through meeting?" And I said, "Oh, no, I've got a bunch of good stories from my grandmother and my mother-in-law and another good friend." And she said, "Oh, we'll come back." So we came back, and although I didn't type them in at the time, I sort of finished, and she says, "You know, these stories need to be told." And I said, "Yeah, they really do, because so much of this is going on today." So that's how the idea for Heroines of the Kitchen Table came along. And this is actually 4 stories. I wrote it first as an anthology. And the anthology decided to be sort of dull. It kind of needed something to connect it together. So I invented a character who shows up mysteriously in all 4 of these stories and ends up at the end kind of tying it all together.
And the stories have a connection to Hitler.
Oh, yes. Well, my grandmother actually told me her stories when I was a little kid. My grandfather said you never spoke about it. So they were kind of this neat little clandestine thing that...
She was from Poland.
Yes. And so my grandma used to tell these stories. And she had seen Hitler speak in 1930. And she said, "He's hungry for power. He's no good. We've got to get out of here." And so my grandfather and these 2 very dear friends of theirs, one had a sister in New York, left. My grandfather was going to send money to my grandmother, and she was going to bring the 2 boys over, my dad and my uncle. And my grandmother refused to let her boys march in a Hitler Youth parade.
Oh, boy.
So she was
Targeted.
just as wanted as anybody else. And so she kind of meandered her way through, and it's a fascinating story. And I just love to hear her tell it. So anyhow, and I also have this very vivid memory of things, and so that was very easy to write. And then she talked about, and it was kind of like the Underground Railroad, how she made her way from this little corner of Germany, Poland, to Hamburg, to America eventually in 1936.
Wow.
And I actually have her and my grandfather's passports. My grandfather's passport looks like this. It says on the top, Reisepass. And my grandmother's passport has in the middle of the symbol here a swastika in 1936. So it was very symbolic to me of what all went on. And so anyway, so all these stories got put together and put into this book. And then I thought, well, I don't know if I can really publish this. And my neighbor kept saying, "Carol, these stories need to be told." So I took a writing course at Keefe Tech, had this wonderful instructor, Carrie Johnson, and she used to have us write things and read them aloud to the class if we felt like it. So being the brave me that I was, I would read things and she would go, "Oh, she wouldn't say that. Now come on, now get real." And she had all of these wonderful comments, and I just, you sort of felt like...
She just refined you.
Yeah, well, it was kind of like when people go on, what's the show? America's Got Talent.
Oh, right.
and they get knocked down all the time. And all of a sudden, when you get a positive word,
Yes.
it's like, this is great.
I can do this.
I can do this.
Yes,
and so
right.
she convinced me I could really do it. So I finally got the book together. And I love the writing process. To me, that's very easy because
But then you got to get it
just
into
put it
this.
in my mind. Well, back when I started this book, there was a thing called Create Space. And they had a fantastic group of
What year
technical
was
support
that?
people.
In about 2014,
14.
yeah.
And so, anytime I sort of got stuck with something or had formatting issues or whatever, and I'm very tech savvy, so I didn't have too much trouble with it. And so that's how I got this book done. And I designed the cover using their cover design thing of two people sitting at a kitchen table with a portion of my grandmother's passport superimposed. And then I finished this book and I thought, gee, I really like writing. I mean, my English teacher would have thought, not her. But I said, I need something really light. And it was close to my 50th high school reunion. And I thought, oh golly, I'm always telling these stories about me in gym class. That would be just a fun thing to do. And so I wrote Gym Class Klutz. And by this time I had joined a group called the Writers Loft, which was in Sherborne at the time. And I had gotten a bunch of mentors, and they did a lot of workshops and little, one-day kind of things that were fantastic. And I just kept on writing. I was told, however, that this was perfect young adult fiction. Well, young adults nowadays are not interested in this, and I should have called it the Gym Class Klutz of 1965. Oh. But anyway, it was a really big hit at my high school reunion. People just loved it and really related to it. And most of the time it's people our age that love this book. But nonetheless, I designed the cover as kind of a real funsy thing too.
Well, we had you on our show with chair volleyball people, and you talked about how chair volleyball was your first sport that you could really excel at.
Oh, that's for sure. Yes.
So they you got a softball image on the cover here. Did they try to make you a softball player?
Oh, my gym teacher insisted that anybody could hit a softball.
Well,
and I am the only person who was ever kept after school for phys ed. I mean, kids get kept after school for math and things like this. And after 2 weeks of her pitching and me swinging, and it was too high, too low, too fast, too slow, too low, and so on, she finally gave up. And she said, just go run around the track. And she put me on the girls' track team.
okay.
But unfortunately, this was before Title IX, and money was tight, and we didn't have fares for us to charter buses to get to the games. So our girls' track team was dissolved after three matches. Yeah. But anyway, it was sort of in keeping with my.
That was the success in the Klutz anyway. That's where it could lead to, huh?
Yeah. So who knew?
Yeah.
So I had a lot of fun with that book. And now that I'm retired, I only do things that are fun. If it's not fun, I'm not going to spend my time doing it. And the third book kind of grew out of just conversations with people about education. And I had worked at the State Department of Education for 10 years. And, I kept thinking back about all of the issues that we were dealing with and socioeconomic levels and racial problems and this and that. And I said, people really need to understand the present better by looking to the past. And so I had spent these couple of years in the Meridian separate school district as a teacher, and I was absolutely the most unprepared person in the world. I mean, the math and science I knew very well.
So this was teaching class Klutz.
But teaching, yes, but the first couple days the kids ate me alive. I mean,
I can understand
they
that.
gave me a dreadfully hard time. And of course I looked like I wasn't much older than a student. In fact, the cafeteria lady asked me the first month of school every day, are you a student or a teacher? And I wore my hair in a bun and spiky heels and everything else to try and look like a teacher. It really didn't work. But with time and with a couple of teacher cohort friends that were just amazing, we pulled through the school year, and even the parent conferences we survived. And the kids flourished. By the end of the year, it was amazing what they had learned and how much progress they had made.
And this was a
It
mixed class
very
of
successful.
black and white students?
Yeah, it was about half and half in the
Yeah,
classes.
okay.
And in the beginning of the school year, you know, a white kid would look at me and say, I'm not sitting next to her.
Really?
And I'm not going to
was
sit there.
1970.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and they'd shove their seat. And I made the mistake of saying, I don't care whether they're green, orange, yellow, black, or purple. You're going to sit there. And the student starts in with this song of Purple People Eater. That was
Yeah.
kind
okay.
of how the
Well, you
class
broke
went.
the ice anyway, yeah.
But it became really very, very rewarding.
Well, the three books, as I listen to you talk about the stories, I really see a lot of social commentary in this, starting with obviously the horror of the Nazi era in Western Europe, and then even the gym class Klutz, I suspect, has some aspects of the way women weren't respected in athletics. I mean, I can think of the difference between girls and playing basketball when we were in school versus watching the women's NCAA tournament on ESPN today with 35,000 people watching or something, and then the Mississippi story. What is the Mississippi story? Does that get into some of the racial conflicts that were still
yes.
obviously
Yes.
pretty warm in the 1970s?
Very much.
Even though
yes. That's a good chunk of the story, and it was also very difficult because a lot of the reason there was this huge teacher shortage, unbeknownst to me until I'd been there about a month, was that the schools, a lot of the white teachers had left and gone to the Baptist churches where they had Sunday school classrooms and started schools there. So
Private
this
schools.
they had started their own private schools, and so this left this huge void.
Yes.
And there really weren't enough teachers. And so our classes, there were 40 kids in a class.
Wow.
And so that was pretty amazing. I kind of look back and remember that I actually survived with M&Ms. And I always had a thing of these on my coffee table at home and on my desk at school. And I used to eat the red ones when I was really angry and upset, and the yellow ones when I had a really good day.
And did you share them when students would come and talk to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And occasionally my candy jar got kind of raided, but that was okay too. It was one of the things. And the other thing that helped me survive was keeping a diary. My journal was what sort of let me just dump out steam.
And did that lead into some of that journal content?
That journal content is in the book.
Yeah.
A number of the things in there. In fact, someone read the book and said, "Oh, no kid would ever say that." And I said, "Well, actually, a kid did say that to me." He said, "Ms. Lady, if you don't care about me, why should I care about your math?" And somehow that message really got across, that it changed how I taught. Because it was about the students and not,
Right.
it was more about the students than it was about the math. And I think I became a much better teacher. But people said, "Oh, no kid would ever say that." Well, it was right there in my diary. And so, but that made the book very easy to write.
So does this flow as a novel then with characters
yeah.
that you had to
Well,
create, or were they largely?
The characters were actually composites because I couldn't put over
Sure.
160 kids in a book. But the characters were composites of like 10 or 12 students that sort of behaved like this one or behaved like that one. And the parents that show up at the conferences were real.
Yeah. Having coached Little League, I could imagine the stories that you could get. I imagine from a teaching standpoint, it's even more dramatic.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
And especially in this rather charged atmosphere,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And well, the principal, I had a black principal who was marvelous. And he just really had a laissez-faire attitude. And I mean, these kids were not ones to sit in their seats and,
Right.
pay attention. So I used to devise all of these things where the kids would walk around the room and count number of feet. And then they had to calculate the area in their feet. And things like this. And it was a fabulous exercise. Well, one day when the kids were walking around the room, measuring dimensions, the principal walks past. And he
I
sort of
thought
just
you were conducting a
pokes his
march.
He
protest
pokes
march.
his head in the room, and one of my most troubling students looked at him and he said, "Oh, sir, we's really doing math. Don't give her a hard time." So he just kind of stood outside and wandered back a little bit later, and the kids are putting their calculations up on the board. And he just smiled and walked on, but the assistant principal hated me because I was a Yankee. Of course, I didn't have the proper accent at all.
No.
And he used to stand there in the doorway and do everything imaginable to quietly harass me, so to speak. So he's in the book too.
Any thought of making any of these into a movie?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to go about
Somebody,
that.
I know.
They would probably make, both of these would probably make, well, they'd probably all make really good movies.
Yeah, I mean the stories, and they just really have. I mean, I haven't read the books yet, but you're inspiring me to want to do that. But and I hope everybody who's watching this is going to be. Are these available on Amazon? Is that where one would find them?
Yeah, I really like to use bookshop.org, and then put in Carol Lynn Luck, because you get the books at the same price as on Amazon.
Okay.
And it also helps to support
That's
local.
bookshop.org.
Yes.
And is this is an online bookstore?
Yes, it's an online bookstore, but it supports local bookstores, and I'm
really?
a big fan of supporting the local and keeping folks like that in business.
Have you done any book? What do they call them at bookstores, or don't they do those anymore?
I did one at Barnes and Noble before. Actually, I think it was Magnolias I did there before COVID, and then you kind of, when you're marketing a book, you kind of have to find the sort of audience. And so this book here I took to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and the I was down in Houston at my sister's, and we went to their Holocaust Museum.
Oh, that's great.
And they carried it in their bookstore. And I've done some teacher training kinds of things and stuff like this, where teachers, and this book is absolutely appropriate for middle school students and up.
So these were all basically published through the technological,
the other
these are on Kindle?
KDP, yeah.
Are they on
other,
Kindle?
Yeah.
That's that sort of, and
yes.
But as far as getting them printed, did you have to arrange to get a printer? I think you
No, the print on demand for Kindle Direct Publishing does those, and I had to transfer this book from CreateSpace to KDP.
Okay.
So that they could do the print on demand. But I actually published them using Boker and Ingram Spark, because they can then make these books available to every bookstore and every library in the world.
Wow, okay.
As opposed to, people can order them from Amazon, but libraries and bookstores and that don't necessarily go through those channels.
Have you worked to get reviews on these, or have some popped up on?
Oh, I have a number of reviews, but I don't really work hard at that, because to me, these stories are out there in the universe.
Right.
And I don't intend to ever get rich writing books.
No.
It's not my livelihood, and so it's just something that if people pick it up and get some enjoyment out of it, can relate to something in it, or pick up a few lessons, it's really good. And I think, even Class Klutz had its lessons, where I had always found school very easy. And when kids struggled in math, I just figured, they're just not working hard enough, they're just not trying. Until I hit gym class, and I realized that maybe these kids were really trying. And so I became a lot more empathetic individual as a result. And I really could understand how they felt.
Right.
So it's been fun.
In recent years, you put together a author show on somewhat similar to this, I think, on the same station with Josh Brogadur. Want to just talk a little bit about a couple of your experiences in doing that and some of the...
Well, the interesting thing was, with my first book, I really wanted to be able to put a video on my website. And so I contacted Josh Brogadur because I knew he was working with, actually, I think it was ESPN at the time. He's with Channel 5 News now. And as a newscaster. And I had known him many years ago as my daughter's middle school social studies teacher, before he'd ever gotten into TV and any of this. And we'd kind of kept up on and off over the years, and I knew he had moved back to this area. And so I contacted him and I said, is there any way I could go about getting a TV show done? He said, oh, I'd be happy to do it for you, he said, but I don't have a camera.
Yeah.
And he said, but you can probably get one from your local Access TV station. So I came down here to Access Framingham and signed up to be a member and asked to rent the equipment. And they said, oh, sure. When do you need it? And I said, well, let me check with Josh. So I called him back and he said, oh, I went and checked with Norwood, which was where he lived. And he said, if you don't mind working with high school kids, they're more than happy to, do an hour-long show with you. And we'll, take it from there. We can cut whatever you want. So I had a blast. I so enjoyed being there. The students were fantastic. And people who go into communications are generally real people. So it was a lot of fun. And so then somebody from here called me up and said, we haven't seen you at the studio. Have you even had a tour yet? So I came down and I thought, this would be really fun. And they said, well, what's your expertise? And I said, well, it was all about this book. I said, oh, wait a minute. I had joined the Writer's Loft and I knew a whole lot of authors from there. I said, oh, wow. I said, I could do a show with local authors. And they said, well, here's what you have to do.
Yeah.
So of course, I'm always anxious to learn anything new. And so I jumped into novel ideas, chats with local authors. And this went, well, for 2 years, Josh Brogadier co-hosted the show with me. And then I just kind of took off after that. But then I broke an ankle when COVID hit. And so the show sort of came to a grinding halt at that point.
So are you working with any other authors now, or do you have any involvement in, are you working on a fourth book? Or?
Well, I have about 4 books that have been started. And I just haven't been able to sit still long enough. I now have 2 little grandkids in New Hampshire. And so, every chance I get, I drop whatever I'm doing and head up there. And I'm just involved in our History Center here and the Senior Center and a few other things. And so I haven't managed to sit still long enough to get any of these to fruition, but they might make it.
Well, I'm glad we got you to sit still here for about a half an hour anyway to talk about your experience in putting together these 3 really fascinating stories. I just, as I said before, I think the social commentary on all 3 of these really resonates with some of what's going on in the world today, and probably always will, what's going on in future worlds even for that matter. And I congratulate you for being persistent to take your ideas that came from that envelope back in the very beginning and turning it into these 3 wonderful books. So thank you very much, Carol, for doing this, and thank you for being here. It's been great to see you again, and I look forward to hearing more about. You will get that 4th one done, I bet.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, Dave.
And everybody else out there in TV land, go look up these books on. Was that
bookshop.org?
Bookshop.org or Amazon.
Just put in Carol Lynn Luck.
And put in Carol Lynn Luck, and you too can learn about some of this, and it may even inspire you to write your own book. You heard Carol's story today.
You're never too old to try anything.
And come back and watch us. We're on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays on Access Framingham TV on Saturday mornings, 8:30 during the week and 7:30 on Saturday. And we put these shows up on YouTube too. So check us out and check these books out. Thanks for watching. Good night.